have an honest question for you. Is Commander too social? So today's topic comes courtesy of a newer player named Bilble Ballable. And the topic is, how do you handle constant chattering while playing? And, you know, honestly, this is one that took me a very, very long time to deal with myself. So I'm actually kind of excited to talk about this, because this is one of the main things that prevented me from enjoying Commander for literally years. But before we get into this, I want to let you know that aside from these Reddit posts, if you want Commander decks that dominate tables without dominating your wallet, my usual shtick is making decks that do just that. So definitely subscribe now if you like what I'm doing here, and tell 3 friends what I'm building over here on this channel. That said, let's get back to the topic at hand. They said, I love joking, banter, and diplomacy and such in an EDH pod as much as anybody. However, in some recent games at my LGS, I've had people who would constantly babble and discuss Magic the Gathering things not related to the ongoing game. Now, okay, before we get any further in that, I do want to say this is a social format. Like this, the thing about Magic the Gathering, a thing that one of my old podcast hosts, Biminem, had to explain to me when I was getting him into 60 card and he was desperately trying to get me into Commander, is that for a lot of people, this is a social format, and this is some of the only socializing that those people get in general. Like, throughout the entire week, they're probably working at a job with people who do not share any of their actual interests. And one of the only ways that they actually can talk with people outside of on the internet who have shared interests with them is, well, at the local hobby shop, where they're going to be talking with a bunch of other nerds about a bunch of other nerdy things. And like I said, this took me a really long time to wrap my head around, not because I didn't understand the specifics of it, the idea of nerd culture not being ubiquitous damn near everywhere outside of, like, I don't know, Marvel movies, is something that basically anybody can understand at a deep or even just a basic level. But you never want to be the person who's an asshole telling those people who, again, this may be their only chance to socialize with other human beings not on the internet. You don't want to tell that person that they shouldn't be talking about a thing at a table with you, when again, this is the only place they're going to get to actually do that. So I can understand this being a problem to grapple with. So back to the pod, my opponents would only really pay attention to the game when it is their turn, or ask, what did you do after someone else's turn? It's a real killjoy for me, especially because I'm a newbie and I have to focus extra hard to understand what's going on in the game. Oh boy, no, I get that. I completely understand that. So I've talked with people who actually are, like, involved with making things at Wizards of the Coast. I had the opportunity to talk to some of them at a convention that I was at years ago, and one of the things that they noted to me is that Commander is kind of a horrible game for onboarding new players, mostly because it is the most complicated way that Magic the Gathering can exist, while simultaneously being the most played version of the most complicated card game on the planet. And damn near anybody who's ever tried to teach anyone anything can tell you that it's freaking impossible to try to teach somebody something when they are constantly whiplashing their head back and forth between a lot of distractions. It's actually one of the reasons why when I try to teach people things like cooking or anything like that, I try to isolate them in an area where they are only having to focus on the one thing. Because when your brain is pivoting into a bunch of different areas, you lose focus, and when you don't have focus, you don't have retention. So yeah, I can definitely see this being a problem. This particular part wasn't a huge problem for me getting into Commander because I'd already been playing Magic the Gathering, but I can see this being a huge issue for anybody who is newer, 100%. Now, they go on to say that they've tried many approaches. When they ask people to focus a bit more on the game, they'll usually apologize and then just keep on rambling. Some told me that they have ADHD and that's just how they are. Some have rightfully claimed that it's a social game, and I shouldn't be so sensitive. To that, I can say again, I'm never asking for poker quiet, just that everybody is following everybody else's turns most of the time. All right, so let's go ahead and knock these out one by one. So, whenever somebody apologizes and then just keeps on rambling, you have a couple options. You can try to hold the person accountable and say, I understand you apologize, but like, obviously you're not very sorry because you keep on repeating the action. But that's a thing that you do when somebody has like actually slighted you. Speaking in a commander game isn't really that, so that's not really an appropriate response here. But what you can do is build a deck that forces people to pay attention. Build a deck like, say, an Aristocrats deck or a Control deck that is constantly keeping an eye on the board like a hawk and removing various people's pieces. Because the second part, I think, is a very important reason why you would want to do that. You see, a lot of Magic the Gathering players are neurodivergent. This is just kind of understood. We all understand that all of us got the autism gene that doesn't care about trains, but cares about shiny pieces of cardboard. I say that mostly as a joke, but I'm also pretty sure that there's a higher propensity for autism in the Magic the Gathering community, or really any neurodivergency whatsoever, be it ADHD or what have you. So, as somebody who is not diagnosed, but pretty damn sure, I can tell you my experiences with Dungeons and Dragons, and maybe that will kind of illuminate this problem for you a bit. You see, anytime that I personally need to play a game with a bunch of people that requires taking turns, especially long turns, I actively get a migraine if I feel like nothing is happening that I can participate in. It feels like watching a very, very boring passive thing, and that actively causes me pain after a little bit of time. Now, I don't know what the problem with that is, but it's an issue that I've had with Commander, it's an issue that I've had with Dungeons and Dragons, it's an issue I've had with things that I actually like. I like Commander, I like D&D. It is a struggle for me to play these things because of that. So I will almost always gravitate towards something that will allow me to keep my brain engaged while people are going through their turns. And for me, that's usually bringing my Switch or a Steam Deck into wherever I'm at so that I can do stuff on other people's turns while still paying attention to it, much like watching a Netflix show on a second monitor. And then, because I really like playing Control, I usually get to just interact with whatever game-ending thing is going to be happening, and I try not to counterspell every damn thing on the board. That's just me. If you're playing Control, then you will always have to take a more active role in any game you're playing than with any other deck you possibly could play. My first suggestion would be playing Control because of that. By picking a Control deck for whatever pods you're in, you will be doing two things that will both help you a ton. Number one, you have to pay attention to the board so much that you are actively engaged more than you otherwise would be. This was the secret sauce for me. I learned how to enjoy Commander by playing Sephiroth, Lathril, and AC. AC and Lathril were solitaire decks that taught me to just do my thing and then grab a game system and then wait for other people's turns to be over, and Sephiroth taught me how to do Control. And by learning how to play Control in this environment with lots of people, I got the engagement that I was otherwise lacking in Commander, and that helped me out a ton with my headaches and everything. But here's the other thing that Control does that I think people don't really consider, and that is it decomplicates the board. You see, one of the main reasons that people will drift away from paying attention to their Commander games is because there's a player playing Solitaire. Now, again, I noted two of the decks that taught me to enjoy Commander were Lathril and AC, and they are very much solitaire decks. But the reason that Sephiroth stuck with me so much is I could identify the player who was taking up the majority of game time with a ton of game actions without really having anybody have the opportunity to do anything. And I could eliminate their important board pieces. Find the Storm player, kill their Stormkin artist. Find the Aristocrat player, kill their Zolaport Cutthroat. Go and find the thing that the player is relying on so that they can extend their turns and what they are doing very, very far. If somebody's taking 10 to 20 game actions in a turn, everybody's going to naturally drift away from that game unless they are themselves the Control player who actively has to pay attention to what's going on. And I think this is where we run into a bit of a problem. And I don't want to go further in the post just yet, because there's actually something that I saw in the responses here that I think illuminates a huge issue with Commander players, and it kind of feeds into the play control problem. You see, further into the thread, I find a post from C-Dub from Minnesota, I think. Tried explaining this to a buddy of mine who was constantly playing solitaire with himself because he doesn't like being mean. Bitch, being mean is the point. Interact with the table and quit tapping your stuff to make more stuff, and then passing the turn. So there is a huge problem that I want to point out that it's not a problem that I'm uniquely pointing out. It's actually something the Distraction Makers said on their channel. If you haven't seen them before, I highly recommend them. But the idea is that in any strategy game, you have options between guns and butter and, well, diplomacy. There's a bunch of options you have access to, but primarily there's guns and butter. Making things that blow up my opponent's things, or making things that make me more things. And the most powerful strategy in Commander is, well, butter. Think about it. What's more powerful, killing one of my opponent's permanents or spawning 4 of my own permanents by playing a doubling season? One of these is infinitely more powerful than the other, generally speaking, and players lean into this because we min-max this game even if we don't think we do. And if you don't think you do, if you looked at EDH Rec even once, you are in fact trying to min-max at some level. So that's just what we do as players. It's not a thing to shy away from, it's a thing to understand and grapple with. Because making lots of resources is such a popular and effective strategy in Commander, it naturally leads to these multi-step turns where players are just churning out more of their resources. The way you handle that is by being a control player and removing those resources from your opponent so that your opponents do not have the ability to keep churning out resources. If you can lower the amount of time your opponents spend on their individual turns, you will inadvertently lower the amount of time that players are spending just kind of lollygagging while somebody else is soloing their turn. A board wipe, removing everybody's important game pieces, forces them to only have 1 or 2 viable game actions. And once they only have 1 or 2 viable game actions, there are very few excuses for somebody taking forever on their turn. Now, to the next point where people have said that it's a social game, you shouldn't be so sensitive. I kind of understand where they're coming from, but like, maybe it's just the fact that Magic the Gathering players are not the best at socializing even with each other. But when somebody's like, you shouldn't be so sensitive, I'm just trying to have a conversation, I feel like there are, generally speaking, better ways to communicate that to you. Like, that's one that I wouldn't say is entirely on you. When somebody does that kind of rhetoric towards me personally, I usually will just go, okay, cool, I guess it's time for us to be locked into a different conversation entirely for the next 2 uncomfortable minutes, because it's not about being sensitive, my guy. It's about me asking you to walk down an alley with me, not watch me walk down and me watch you walk down. I want us to walk down the alley together. I want you and I to play a game together, not me watch you play a game for 5 minutes, then you watch me play a game for 5 minutes. I would like us to be playing this game as a unit, and in order for us to do that, we need to pay attention to each other's boards a little better. I don't know, I just feel like when players do this stop being so sensitive rhetoric, then they just don't understand how to convince people of anything. They just have their opinion and then they shout it from the rooftops. Then again, this is a Reddit post. It's only from the perspective of one person, so that's always something to consider. That said, let's go ahead and continue and see what else is in here. It then says, what do you think? Am I being oversensitive? No, you're not. You're not being oversensitive. You're identifying a problem that every Commander player who's used to 60 card Magic or just used to more engaging games has dealt with since the dawn of this format. You are voicing a standard problem that all of us have, even if many of us don't want to admit they have it with the game. That's not something that an overly sensitive person does. That's something that you merely analyze and point out. That said, let's continue. They said, any tips for handling situations like these? Again, my biggest tip would be a deck that focuses very hard on control. Bringing a control deck to the table will make other people pay attention to you even on their turns, and it gives you something active to do during other players' turns. It also gives you the ability to lower the amount of resources that your opponents have throughout the game so that they have fewer things to churn butter out with. If they lose a doubling season, suddenly they cannot create umpteenth copies of whatever the fuck they're trying to do. If they lose anything, they are suddenly in a position where they cannot just solo pilot their way through their turns, and they're going to have to consider your open mana and other resources before they do damn near anything. This automatically creates more engaging games, and I feel like the idea that a lot of Commander players have that, removing people's pieces off the board is mean is just ignoring a vital aspect of the game. Like, removal is a vital aspect of Magic the Gathering. It's just a thing that is baked into how this game is played, and if you don't like removal, then you don't like Magic, actually. You like making Rube Goldberg machines. But yeah, my biggest suggestion is if people are operating in a way that you do not enjoy, if there is a way mechanically that you can handle that, since you've already tried the avenues of trying to correct this behavior socially, then making a control deck and playing the control deck at the table, eliminating people's resources, making sure that their turns are going to be quicker because they have fewer things to churn through, and getting better at identifying, I know you're a newer player, but getting better at identifying the cards that people are using to extend the length of their turns a lot, and getting really, really good about just eliminating those completely. But we're not done just with the response, because he said that, judging from the comments, this is apparently a controversial topic. There are a lot of helpful advices too. I will definitely try to narrate my plays more and play decks that keep everyone involved. If you think I'm trying to force silence and solemnity in a casual format, you're clearly not understanding what this is about. No, I don't think you're trying to force silence at all. I don't think that that's what you're trying to do. Again, this is a problem I ran into not only with Magic the Gathering, but even with other games that are far more social, like Dungeons & Dragons. This is just an aspect of tabletop gaming that I have had to adjust to in a group environment, so I'm trying to give what I can to help here. But I want to see what controversies are actually in this thread. The first one here is from Papa Luigi, and they said, just do your thing, pause for responses. If it's a major play, you should ask if there are any, and if they ask what happened after your turn, give them a brief summary. I played some spells, drew a bunch of stuff, and now I have a 13/13 with reach. Yeah, that's fair. If nobody wants to pay attention to your board, then you just play through your turn and just literally ask the brief question, do you have a response? Because if nobody has a response, then you just do your thing. And then there you go. But again, I feel like that doesn't fully solve the problem. That just gets you through your turn easier. But then he goes on to say, people are going to chat. For some of them, it's the only social interaction they get each week. They're absolutely more interested in the conversation than the third spell that you are playing. My biggest advice is to find a good pod and latch onto it for dear life. A group of consistent, polite, and considerate friends who like to play the same way you do is a much better experience than randoms who will forget your name by turn 3. A smaller piece of advice is that if you want to hold the pod's attention, you should be playing cards that have a large or consistent effect on the board state. I like to think I'm an attentive player, but even I check out after the solitaire player's third round of triggers, especially if I don't have any interaction. Build a voting deck if you want to bring the pod in on the game. It's something that requires constant input from them and might get them talking about the game. So I don't know how effective a voting deck is going to be because I've not personally tried this one. It sounds like decent advice, but again, I'm not sure. My experience when other people have played voting decks has been generally that they're kind of miserable to play against because the game dynamic that they create is one that it just makes the talking happen still a lot, and it makes turns take forever, and that's kind of creating the same problem while technically being a solution. But I'm not sure. I am not entirely sure if that is what would happen every single time. That's just been my experience when I'm at tables where other people are playing voting decks, like the Galadriel deck or otherwise. Papa Luigi actually does have good advice here, though, saying we need to reframe interaction from being mean to just being part of the game. It isn't mean to remove a threat. It isn't mean to have good threat assessment. Hell, it isn't even mean to have bad threat assessment. It's just part of playing a social game. You get to interact with complex states and create a fun environment. I'd 100% rather struggle and claw my way to the end of the game than do nothing for 80 minutes and get steamrolled by whoever has the best opening hand. And yeah, that's entirely fair. Again, that's 100% in line with my thought process. Now, I don't think that I'm on board entirely with the voting part, like I said, but I am on board with playing more interaction. There was a response here saying that I really hate playing against counter or token decks on paper. I'm not keeping track of all that for me, much less for you. I'm playing bracket 3 for a reason. My guy, you do understand that, like, counter decks and token decks are generally bracket 3 decks. Like, those are deck strategies that usually do not have enough resources to keep up in bracket 4, much less CDH. Those are quintessentially bracket 3 strats. It's Doc Time says, if it were a repeated problem with some just refusing to participate in the actual gameplay, I would stop waiting for them to let my stuff resolve as a starter. Gotta give them a few times, though. Like you said, it is a social game. So, yeah, generally speaking, that's a good piece of advice. If nobody's playing blue, if nobody's playing the instance they need to respond, then I think that is something that is perfectly reasonable to do. But again, definitely discuss this with your pod. Just be like, hey, does anybody have any responses here? If you might, then pay attention to what I'm doing. If you don't, then feel free to check out. Winston here actually had a story about how a person got really upset that they didn't know he was playing a very important card, and he told him that he announced it very loudly, and he wasn't listening and ignored several times, and I said, I am playing, you need to watch. Again, it's Reddit. I don't have context for the entirety of what's going on in this particular story, but at the same time, I've met people like this before, so I don't doubt that they exist. Ben the Bruiser's advice here, I actually think is something everybody should follow no matter what. Like, this is something that everybody should be doing, generally speaking, in Commander, no matter who you are or what your skill level. And that is narrating your turn and your actions. I say exactly what I'm doing, like I'm tapping 2 black and 2 red to cast this card. The card does X. Are there any responses? Now, there is a middle ground here that you need to be comfortable engaging in, because I've seen people try to do this, but they do it by reading the card verbatim whenever they play it instead of like shorthanding what the card does. So instead of playing Rampant Growth and saying, I get a land, they go, I play Rampant Growth. It allows me to go into my library and search out a basic land. And then after I do so, I have to shuffle my library. Like, my guy, that is too many fucking words. You're creating the problem by trying to eliminate the problem. Please, for God's sakes, stop. Be familiar enough with your cards to explain them and explain what they do in a concise manner. Sometimes you can say things in fewer words than what the card actually reads. Looking at you, guy who tried to read fucking necromancy to me in a tournament. I stopped playing Yu-Gi-Oh! So I didn't have to read books when I'm playing Magic the Gathering, and yet here you are trying to read this entire goddamn novel to me. Please, I beg of you, shut the up fuck. Now, there were some meaner responses in here that I'm not 100% on board with, like Lost NPO Marketer saying, buddy, you're playing Commander with random people. The level of dedication and attention you are asking your opponents to have is not what they are there for. Go play Draft or any other constructed format if you want the games to be tight and have every move paid attention to. I disagree with that. I feel like when we're playing a game, we should have the common courtesy for the people in the game to pay attention to the game, at least on a base level. I don't think that that's unreasonable, and I think arguing that that's unreasonable is in itself unreasonable. And then we have a thread spawning from that saying that EDH is inherently casual and loose, which, yes, technically it is. I agree, but it's also the most popular way to play Magic the Gathering, so telling people that they should not play the most popular way to play Magic the Gathering anymore, I don't know. I feel like it makes people leave the game faster than it makes people enjoy the game. This actually spawned an entire fight in the thread about, like, how much heavy lifting the word casual actually means in here, where Epic Owl points out that, like, hey, EDH was created as a casual format, and it's played as a casual format. Do you and your friends play Monopoly Cutthroat or something? And then dude responds going, hey, the word casual does a lot of heavy lifting in EDH. Literally every single possible complaint someone has about it gets brushed aside with it's a casual format, bro. So, you know, I'm just going to show you guys something. This is actually a form of thought-permeating cliche. It's an idea where you can use just a very short and quippy phrase to shut down an entire conversation. It's a form of loaded language that is often passed as folk wisdom intended to end an argument and patch up cognitive dissonance with a cliche rather than actually offer a point. So, like, while it's true that Magic EDH is a casual format, what does that actually mean? Does that mean that players should not be paying attention to other players' spells when they're playing? Because, like, if that's the case, why are counterspells not banned in EDH? Why is interaction a part of the format, if not, you know, to be a thing we pay attention to? I also did see a comment in my responses, actually, a few months ago about why there are so many people who play Magic who are actually, like, pointing out logical fallacies and stuff, and did they just get their time on r/atheism, and that's what's going on now? And I just want to say, I appreciate the feedback, but for me personally, there's actually a history for other channels that I have made that are my full-time job, so I don't know. I don't want to focus on that, but you're not completely off. Regardless, the main point seems to be that our OP wants to have games that are more interactive and people are paying more attention to. And I don't think that there's anything inherently wrong with that. I think trying to make sure that you can find a good pod is a very hard sell for a lot of people because not all of us know how to even do that in the first place. So the best thing you can do, the only thing you can ever truly control, is your own actions and reactions. Build yourself a control deck. Make sure that you are paying attention to every player's actions and eliminate any card that people are using to extend their turns artificially or well past the point of comfortability. If a turn is taking more than 2 minutes, ask yourself, which card is my opponent using that is causing that to happen? Is it the Zulaport Cutthroat or is it the Bolas's Citadel? If you want to min-max for just having these more interactive, more fun, more back and forth games, then instead of trying to find the card that's going to end the game and eliminate that, focus all of your efforts on finding the cards that artificially extend the game and people's turns. Eliminate those when you see them, and you're probably going to start having better games after just a handful of weeks. You're not even going to really be changing the behaviors of the people at your table. You'll just be creating the game experiences that you personally wanted to have in the first place. Players with fewer options take fewer game actions. The fewer game actions are taken in anybody's turn, the less conversation people will naturally drift to as a way to entertain themselves while other players are taking game actions. Take it from somebody who got a migraine because my group's rogue wanted to RP with the DM for 10 fucking straight minutes. My paladin was on the other half of the city. There's damn near nothing I can do. This is a pain that I have felt a lot over the years, so this is hopefully sound advice. That said, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you agree with this advice, let me know in the comment section below. If you disagree, I'm even more interested in those responses. Let me know in the comment section what your advice would be to this person. If you've got any counters to what I said, I would absolutely love to hear y'all's opinions. And remember, if you want commander decks that dominate tables without dominating your wallet, subscribe. And if you like what I'm doing here, let a few friends know what I am creating on this channel. I appreciate it greatly. Thank you very much for watching, and I will hopefully see you all in the next one. I've made the unfortunate mistake of making all fan art canon, and you guys use that to make a ton of doppelgangers of me that try to ruin my life. So why not go ahead and celebrate that cacophony by picking up the new channel playmat over on Fourth Wall. When you pick up the playmat, take a picture and throw it up on social media tagging me so I can feature you in a future video.